paranormal. It surrounds us. It's everywhere. Tonight, you will hear from the people who live and work within these highly active locations, all in the efforts to discover America's most haunted. With your host, ghost hunter and author, Dan Terry.
Good evening, boys and ghouls. I am Dan Terry, your ghost host with the most haunted. But I am going to get away from that. But got to remind you, we just had the on X Networks XCon, and I wish you all could have been there. It was great. But my producer, Race, who many of you have met on here, has to keep telling people he thinks I've got a store of my own or a storage facility of nothing but T-shirts, because he comments how I always have a different T-shirt on. Well, I want to show him today. I do. I'm wearing the Flatwoods Monster T-shirt from the alien sighting in West Virginia. And the reason I'm doing the alien thing and the reason my skeleton back there, Skelly's got the mask on, is we're going to be delving in to an incident that I have never heard of until talking to this man. He's an author. His name is Ron Felber. Ron is a former deputy sheriff, worked with federal marshals a lot, transporting the worst kinds of criminals. He's an author of a fictional detective series called the Jack Madsen series. And he's wrote a book called The Mojave Incident. And again, the Pascagoula case I was well aware of at the time it happened. The Roswell, of course, we all know, the Cape Girardeau crash. I've had him on here many times, but I have no idea this one. So I'm going to bring Ron on and let him tell us about it. Hey, Ron.
How you doing there, Dan?
Hey, not too bad. But it's kind of, like I said, it's a stunning thing when I read on your page about this Mojave incident. Yeah. I had never heard of it before.
Yeah. Actually, I think one of the book reviewers in the book world summed it up best. He called it the most frightening UFO book ever written. Yeah. And I'll tell you why. It really touches at the heart of things. It's almost like for these two individuals, a curtain was lifted to a whole different reality. Mm-hmm. And it was sustained. So you're not talking about somebody that sees, objects in the sky or has an encounter that lasts 5 minutes. This had real and true duration. And I had them studied by Dr. Bernard Vitone, who was at Georgetown University, the National Center for Psychiatric Disorders, to make sure that everything, they were not prone to fantasy. They were stable individuals. And then I brought them to Asheville, North Carolina, to the Mountain Center for Psychiatry, where Dr. William Annixter retrogressed them. So they had conscious experiences that they could recount to the point where they were in the back of their camper pinching one another. Do you see what I see? With a shotgun, by the way, sitting Indian style with a shotgun on his lap, one of the main individuals.
Smart move.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't do much good. Didn't do much good. But then they had other time where afterwards they're having these horrible nightmares to the point where they were sexually dysfunctional. They couldn't sleep. They couldn't work. Mm-hmm. And so they were retrogressed. And then another 4 hours of time actually on the UFO were recovered.
Ron, I remember, like we talked about, the Pascagoula case. Yeah. That guy, one of them just passed recently, but the other one was making the rounds of the lecture series.
Yep.
Walton is making the rounds of the lecture series with the Arizona case. All of these guys, why haven't we heard of these people before?
Well, I mean, they did one or two interviews, but, it's like this. Maybe, people that were in the war, like in Vietnam or the Gulf War, or whatever it might be. People that talk about it a lot, okay, that's one kind of person. But people that really had a deep-seated terror, something that moved their hearts and their souls, they don't talk about it that much. I mean, this is besides that, this is a fellow who had a very good job. He was a project manager in charge of developing and building shopping centers.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about a fellow with millions of dollars of budget.
Yeah.
You know, that's counting on him being concrete in the things that he does and logical, etc. And UFOs and alien abduction stories don't go well with a career like that.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right on that. All right, Ron, take us back, since I don't know about it. I'm going to assume a lot of people don't. What is from the beginning, the story of the Mojave Incident?
Sure. I'll tell you just quickly, and this maybe answers your first question.
Uh-huh.
I was running a company, and we had quite a large sales force. And I was in the New York area, okay. And a good friend of mine who worked for me was in California. It turned out that his name is Paul Moran, and Paul had a best friend who he played varsity football with at the University of Redlands, who was an all-league football player. And he goes, you know, they don't want to talk about this because they're very conscious of it, and they hold the mother of 3 children, mm-hmm. Family, good job, etc. So they really have buried it. But I know that you're a good writer and a good guy, and this is a good, my best friend. I just want to hook you up and see what happens. I said, I don't have a great interest in doing this, but if you say so, I'll meet him. And I did meet them. And these are like the backbone of America kind of people. I mean, just right. Working hard, college graduates, intelligent, serious people. And so they told me the story, and the more they told me, the more credible it was. And then I said, I'm going to invest some serious time and serious research. And you were in law enforcement, and so was I, like a detective, mm-hmm. and just piece by piece document this. And so we did. The story goes like this. Basically, this would be Elise and Tom Gifford. So Elise was the mother of 2 at the time, 2 young kids, 3 years old, 5 years old. So you can imagine she was ready for a break when the idea of going away for a short vacation with their parents babysitting. So Tom was a hunter, and he said, look, let's do it this way. Let's go to Whiskey Pete's, which is a place just on the lip of the Mojave Desert. And I'm going to go hunting afterwards. So you'll get to go out. We'll have a nice dinner. We'll do some dancing and go out. But then afterwards, we'll stay at the Mid-Hills campsite, and I'll be able to do my hunting in the desert. They get to the Mid-Hills campsite, and it's completely sold out, which was unusual. So they go into the desert themselves, into the Mojave Desert themselves. Now, Tom was a hunter, and he'd been hunting in the Mojave Desert with his father and brother for years, so he felt very comfortable. Elise, on the other hand, not so much. She'd read about drug deals that go down there, murders that go down in the desert, and people never find the bodies, or if they do, it's years later, and was very uneasy about going there and spending the night there, which is what they did in their camper. Mm-hmm. So basically, they decide to go in. They build a campfire, and they're have a couple of steaks, and they're roasting marshmallows. And Tom looks over his shoulder to a mountain, as it's mountainous, and he catches the glimpse of a UFO. Now, this would be something maybe 30 feet in diameter, and it almost sort of peeks out at him, mm-hmm. and then goes back in. Now, the last thing he wants to do is to tell his wife, who's already nervous, oh, guess what I just saw? A UFO. So he inside he's nervous and frightened, but the last thing he wants to do is tell her. Mm-hmm. So the next thing they know, they're doing some stargazing, and all of a sudden, all the sound in the desert stops. And maybe you've been into a place like the Mojave, but it's much noisier than you would think it is. There's all kinds of animals and insects and things like that. So it's pretty noisy. All of a sudden that stops and there's like dead silence. They're looking at stars, and Tom says, well, you know, this is a double star over here. And he's looking at the constellations. And Elise says, well, if that's a double star, this must be a triple star. And they look at it, and there's this incredibly bright, glowing star, which appears to be a star. So it's kind of baffling. But as they look, the next thing they know, there are 9 of them. And they're over a mountain range about 400 yards away. Mm-hmm. And they form the configuration of an M over the mountain range. So they start blinking, almost like they're communicating to one another. And now they think, well, maybe this is a desert storm military exercise or something, you know? But they're very nervous. So Tom, who's a hunter, gets his Browning rifle and his Ithaca shotgun just in case. And soon they see hundreds of shining lights, star-like objects around the mountain range. Mm-hmm. And they start to drop to the ground. And basically, this is the way it's described by him. I can just show you a quick passage. When we first saw them dropping from the sky, we thought it was some kind of military maneuver, maybe for Operation Desert Storm, but it was too massive even for that. I mean, there were thousands of them falling, then rushing towards us. So I kicked out the campfire, grabbed my gun, and ran into the back of the camper with Elise. Then we sat there Indian style until they came, hundreds of them, hundreds of pairs of tiny red eyes glowing in the dark around us. And what they see are these, and this is why I say it's like a curtain going up. They see these gremlin-type beings, like leathery black faces, okay, almost like gremlins or monkeys or like that, but frenzied. And they actually are around the camper and crawling on the camper. And now, obviously, they're incredibly scared. They think they're going to have a heart attack, as a matter of fact. There's a voice telepathically that tells Tom, don't try anything, don't try to shoot us or we'll kill you. You know, just sit in the camper and wait. And so he and Elise are just, you know, like pinching each other. What is going on? Do you see this? And they're comparing notes. And soon they look up, and the entire, from the windows, the camper has windows, back window and side windows. They look up and they see a massive object. How big? As big as an aircraft carrier.
Oh, God.
That caps the entire valley. And from the mothercraft comes a light, a beam, a probe, maybe 100, 200 feet in diameter, that starts combing the desert floor. Then what they see beam down are 9 illuminated figures. And these 9 figures are bright as white light, but they have huge eyes. They have spindly limbs, a narrow body, and they call them the illuminated beings. And they surround the camper. And what happens next is kind of incredible. And what makes it really scary is they put them through a series upon series upon series of psychological experiments where they bring them back to moments in their life, some pleasant, and many of them not pleasant at all, many of them really horrifying. So, for example, Tom was a hunter, as I mentioned. He has this vision, but it's more than a vision. It's like being there. It's like really happening to him, that he's being hunted like the deer would be hunted. And he's wounded and tracked down and skinned. Elise, who had I don't want to get into a lot of detail about this, but who had been sexually molested as a child, relives that experience, the horror of that experience. Then other things like their wedding day, or other things like Tom in a football game, he was an all-league football player, in a moment of triumph. But these experiences are more than visions. It's like they're living them, and they each are living these experiences together. And many of them, as I say, are really horrifying. And it's like they say that it was like they took a syringe, a hypodermic needle, and were taking the thoughts out of their heads, putting these experiences into their heads. And they thought they were in hell. They start to hyperventilate, and in front of the camper, like at the lip of the camper, are two sort of electric monitors. So if they move forward, the monitors move forward, and they get an electric shock. So they're trapped. They're literally trapped. And when they feel like they're going to undergo cardiac arrest, a kind of white fog comes in and anesthetizes them, calms them down again. So basically, they're being kept alive so that these experiments can continue. When this was discussed under hypnosis, Elise has a lot to say about why they're here and what they came for and what they want, which is, again, unheard of as far as I know. And basically, the feeling is that these beings do not have emotions like humans. And so they are putting them through these experiences, terror, horror, jubilation, etc., happiness, to understand human emotions. And you say, like, why? Because they believe there'll be a major contact between these extraterrestrials and humans. And this is a preparation for how that could happen without, I guess, causing mass hysteria.
Okay.
So after that, they see too, and this is something that's very interesting, and the detail, again, is what makes it so tangible, but they call it a searcher. There's a kind of triangular craft, let's call it, that combs the desert basin as if it's looking for materials.
Okay.
And they have this odor, like a tremendous sulfur, phosphorus odor, hangs in the air, and a drilling sound, as if they're mining. There's a mining operation going on. And what makes that particularly interesting and credible is that, of course, in my research, Alumax does a lot of mining in the Mojave Desert for rare earth materials and exotic metals that are used for laser weaponry, things like lanthanum and others. So isn't that interesting that there are exotic metals there that are used for things like laser weaponry, and maybe these beings needed that or wanted that? Don't know. We really couldn't say. Another interesting thing, and again, this comes out in my research, they describe these beings in great detail, the illuminated figures. And the desert floor has a huge drawing on it that can only be seen from overhead, and it's called the Mojave Twins. And you could go on the internet and just look up Mojave Twins, but exactly what they describe is what the Paiute Indians, they think, put on as either cave drawings, petroglyphs, and also this ground drawing, huge drawing. It looks exactly like the beings that they describe, except those drawings were done 500 years ago. So
not like you have the little ones that look like dark brown, leathery
Gremlins.
gremlins.
Yeah.
And then you've got the almost angelic white.
Actually, scientific, no emotions, very technical, out there to study them.
Okay.
But it is interesting you mentioned angelic presence, because there is a third type. And at some point in time, when they are just on the verge of they're really concerned about their children. They're really concerned that they'll just never be heard from again. And prior to being pulled up onto the craft, memories which were recovered retrogressively through hypnosis, an angelic figure appears, like in the clouds. They describe it as their comforter, a comforter. Angelic presence, flowing robes, the way you would describe an angel. And they have this, again, telepathic message. You'll survive. Your children will be all right. Just bear with this for a short while. It's almost over. And it gave them a great sense of relief. Okay. And they called that their comforter. But the interesting thing too that I find is you could almost put this into a religious perspective. You've got these sort of gremlins with red eyes. Demons. Yeah. You've got these sort of scientific types. I don't know exactly where they'd fit in. But then you've got an angelic presence that they describe as absolutely feminine. Okay. Soothing voice, etc. It almost becomes, like I said, taking a curtain back and seeing a kind of other dimension where things play out in a much different way than we could imagine. So basically, so a lot is going on. You've got this searcher that's apparently mining things. You've got the illuminated figures that are drawing them in for hours now, torturing them essentially. And you've got these gremlins that are frenetic, just frenzied, but evil. I mean, they describe it as like, malevolent for sure. Okay. And then after the comforter comes, there's a little bit more that goes on, but basically they get very tired, and they like they're drugged, and they wind up sleeping, the two of them. But before they pass out or sleep, whatever, they feel like the earth is being carved out around them, and the truck is being pulled up through that probe into the craft. Okay. They have dreams of fighting these white beings and struggling, but only bad dreams. Nothing concrete after that. They wake up the next morning. The campfire is dead, and they feel drugged, and they have no memory except that this terrible feeling of being watched, of being violated, and then basically what happens is that to get the second half of the story, we bring them to Dr. Vitone and Dr. Annixter, who study them. But once they come back, it's like a lot of these astronauts, some of the guys that went to the moon and whatnot. They come back and they're really psychologically disturbed. And the reason is because they've devoted all this energy, this tremendous energy, to, let's say, going to the moon. Right. And so their whole life is focused on this. And then they do it. And it's a momentous thing that they know they're never going to do anything that could possibly be that great again. And they fall into a terrible depression. That's sort of what happened to them. This was such a large event. Nothing mattered. Their jobs didn't matter anymore. This just completely dominated their life.
Sounds like post-traumatic stress disorder then.
Exactly. That's exactly what Dr. Vitone said. He called it the most, I have the quote. Vitone said, highly unusual, traumatizing events outside the realm of normal human experiences. And then Annixter, William Annixter, the most compelling case of its kind I have ever encountered. So we had them take lie detector tests. We had them examined for mental stability, and we had them retrogressed. And at the end, these are scientists, a guy like Annixter, Matone. And so they're not prone to say, oh, yeah, you were abducted by aliens,
Of course.
But guess what? Annixter said, when I look at all the possibilities, the one that is the most likely in my mind is that they were abducted by extraterrestrial aliens.
Ron, this is a lot of stuff to unpack.
Yes, it is.
So listen, let me just jump off here for a second for a quick commercial, and then we're going to come back and pick it up there, because I'm understanding there is, I don't know, were they giving them the idea? They gave them the idea of being assaulted, hunted, scared.
Yes.
Was they then giving them the idea of a angelic, Christ-like figure coming to help them?
Yeah.
Or was it real?
These are things that you really have to look at this story from a bunch of directions.
Yeah.
But I can tell you what I've come up with, and maybe after the break we'll do that.
All right. Yeah, we'll do that in just a second. Stand by. There's a lot of information here, and I'm kind of not, I have no idea where to go with this. Think about this, guys. There's demonic type aliens. You've got cold researchers who just stare. They're in a cage because every time they try to leave, it pushes them back, just like lab rats. And then all this other, the angelic figure coming, the dreams of fighting these things. My God, this is incredible. So if you'll watch this, we'll come back and we're going to talk some more about this really incredible story. Hold on. Friends, we're going to get right back here. I'm going to talk to you before the show's over about subscribing and all of that stuff. We are talking to Ron Felber, the author of The Mojave Incident, inspired by a chilling story of alien abduction. And chilling is not even beginning to cover what I'm feeling from what he's told us so far. Like again, Pascagoula, Walton, none of those come close to what he's telling us about here. So let's get right back to Ron and find out what happened after the scientists got involved.
So, there's a little, if you don't mind, I'll read a couple of little sections.
You go right ahead.
But here's what happened when they got home. They felt watched, and they were very reluctant to talk about it. They just were. These are not people like braggarts, or they're not, incredibly extroverted people that, you wouldn't believe what happened to me. This touched them so deeply that it just resonated and stayed inside their guts. But about a week after they come back, I'll read this. At 2:53 a.m., a scream rang out from the children's room where Tom Jr. and Zoe were sleeping. Elise was the first to enter. She flicked on the light instinctively. Since the inception of their trip to the Mojave, she had lived with the morbid fear that something horrible was about to happen to little Thomas. Now she stopped at the entrance to the room with her husband watching in awe and horror as their child stood sound asleep in the center of the room, spinning like a top. "You sons of bitches," Elise wailed, running to him, then scooping him up in her arms. "You think you can do anything you want, but you can't. Don't dare touch our children. Leave my child alone. Already Tom was beside her. It's okay. It's all right now, he was saying as he guided them back toward the bed. Tom Jr., cradled in her arms, was only now beginning to awaken. Mommy, what's wrong? Nothing, dearest, nothing. Everything is going to be fine, she soothed, laying him back in the bed, her heart still hammering. Now you just go back to sleep. Everything is fine now. Elise backed quietly away from him as his heavy lids dropped. She joined Tom, who stood watching from the doorway, then flicked the light off. But the moment she did, the boy leapt up suddenly in bed. Don't turn the lights off. But why? What's wrong? She asked, stunned. Because when you do, the little monsters come. She sighed. Thomas, there are no monsters. But there are, Mommy. There are, he insisted. They're short and ugly, and they have red eyes. Tom and Elise left the children's room that morning, horrified to think that they were no longer safe, even in the environs of their own home.
So by this time, they had remembered all of what happened to them.
No.
Oh, no,
this is immediately following, and it wasn't until months later that I heard about this story and suggested they go to these doctors and be retrogressed. And they wanted that piece of their story filled in.
Sure.
It was haunting them. You know, they had these dreams and fragments of remembrances, and they wanted to piece it together themselves. They wanted to know what happened.
And that's understandable, but did they recognize the description of the little monsters?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. So these were the red-eyed beings that had invaded them.
So at this stage of the game, they remembered the little beings.
They remembered everything. That was all a conscious experience.
Okay.
This was very much intact, and they relived it and talked about it incessantly. Again, to try to get a fix on, and a lot of people might think, well, maybe they were on drugs, or maybe they ate mushrooms, or maybe they had some canned food that had botulism or something. But Dr. Battone made an interesting observation. Mm-hmm. If you took LSD and I took LSD, for example, and we sat next to each other, you wouldn't see what I saw.
Right. Absolutely.
You would have a totally different set of experiences than me. So to have these two people in correspondence, again, pinching each other, describe what you see and describe what you see, mm-hmm. and comparing notes, so meticulously, that has nothing to do with drugs. Yeah.
That makes sense too.
So Dan, the most incredible thing I think is, and what everybody asks is, why? Why are they here? And in the retrogressive hypnotic state, Elise comes up with some incredible statements. And I'd like to read from the transcript if I can.
Please, of course.
Let me just find that. It won't take long. Dr. Anertzer accepted Tom's answer. He turned in his seat toward Elise, who sat with her body lax, head tilted to one side, lying on her right shoulder. She's in a deep hypnotic trance. Elise, do you have any idea what these beings want or why they're here? It was macabre watching as Elise sprang up in her chair, suddenly animated and alert. Her voice, rather than soft and emotional, took on a new cadence, which was clipped and direct, quite unlike her. Quote, they want to make contact with the population. Tom and I are specimens, imperfect like the human race. When we're ready to communicate with them face to face, then possibly the world will be too. Her actions, such as edging forward in her chair at the moment, seemed mechanical, as did her voice as she continued. They have to study our reactions so they know how to approach us. They don't have emotions like ours, so they need us to teach them. The need to understand humans. The doctor, do you have a sense as to who they are and where they come from? Quote, there are 5 galaxies. Theirs is the next closest. In order for all 5 galaxies to work together one day, they have to start, and they're starting with us, so we'll be united galaxies. What else do you know? The doctor asked, feeling as if he was in contact with someone other than Elise. I know where the universe ends, she said, rattling the words off in staccato fashion, like rounds from a machine gun. Is that something you can put into words? Now there was no denying something incredible was happening. Quote, our universe ends where theirs begins. Our universe ends when all its matter stops mattering to us and starts mattering to them, unquote. Everyone in the room looked to one another, stunned at what they heard and what they were seeing. For now, sitting on the edge of the out-of-date cushioned armchair sat Elise Gifford, her body rigid and vibrating with newfound energy. But, Dan, if you look at that quote, I find it, I study English.
Mm-hmm.
Our universe ends where theirs begins. Our universe ends when all its matter stops mattering to us and starts mattering to them. That's an incredible play on words. And this just popped into her mind like...
Right. I am at a total loss for what she might have meant by that, or what they might have meant.
Well, I mean, if you analyze it, which I've done, she plays a word game with matter, like physical matter, and it matters.
Yes.
So she said it will start mattering to them, when it stops mattering to us. In other words, when we stop caring, when we don't care anymore about the earth, that's when they're going to start caring about it.
Okay.
And so basically, I think it may be a message, it may be an environmental message, maybe a message about nuclear weapons, maybe a message about the deterioration of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
But what it tells me is that there is a line. And when that line is crossed, meaning things deteriorate to a point where there's no turning back, no solution, they will step in. That's what I'm hearing.
That is ominous, to say the least.
To say the least. It's terrifying. It really is terrifying.
I'm seeing a group that is wanting to come in and take over because we can't do it ourselves, but they are, at least in some ways, got an evil or uncaring attitude about humans.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I would. There's a quote that I end this book with from Norman Mailer, the writer.
Yeah.
And here's what he said in a talk show, not related to this, but it just struck me as something.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, the devil might be a presence from another universe. We might be fighting an implacable enemy out there, and the devil might be the agent of the implacable enemy, with God as the tired general fighting that war with his own agents of hope. And if you look at this from a religious standpoint, which I'm not sure that's the way to look at it, I don't really know, but clearly there's human beings in the middle of some competition. Some competition for maybe souls. I don't know.
Okay. So you're thinking this comes down to good versus evil?
That's certainly one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is just try this one on for size. So these beings were in the Mojave Desert to collect rare earths and exotic metals, maybe for fuel, maybe for weapons. Who knows? But let's just say for fuel, that they needed these or wanted these, and they were doing a mining operation. And by happenstance, these two poor people wound up in a camper in the middle of all of it.
Yeah.
I should tell you one other thing, Dan, that I didn't mention, but I will. I didn't want to make it too complicated. But when Tom was a kid, maybe 10, he was fishing with another kid while his parents were camping. And they were at a Lake Mojave, as a matter of fact. Okay. And he saw a UFO. They saw a UFO, an orb that started to approach them. They dropped their fishing rods and ran like hell towards their parents' campsite, with the UFO, at least by their perception, pursuing them. Of course, they got to the campsite and told their parents, "Oh, there's a spaceship that's chasing us," and they had a good laugh about it. But it's not unusual for people that have had childhood encounters to have other encounters. And it's not unusual for people that have been abducted to have been abducted many times, since childhood, like tagged animals.
Yes.
Like the way you tag a shark to see where it feeds and what waters it goes into. And you get, from a scientific standpoint, you get the impression that there's going to be a major encounter. And actually, under hypnosis, the doctor said, will there be an encounter? And she says yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, will it be in my lifetime? And she goes, how long will you live? How's that for an answer? And then he says, will it be in my children's lifetime? And she says, there will be an encounter with extraterrestrials on a massive scale in your children's lifetime.
But that could be now. That could happen anytime. We've got the Navy putting out the videos of the Tic Tacs and such as that.
And did you ever see a guy like Gordon Cooper? You know, Gordon Cooper, the astronaut and the aviation
pioneer
guru. And he go on the internet and just see what he has to say about this. Mm-hmm. He says that they were taking film. I think it might have been Fort Edwards or one of the military installations for, I guess, a recruiting film or something. But they had a camera film there. This was in the desert, also, by the way. And a UFO landed. It put out its landing gear. Beings came out. It was all film. This is Gordon Cooper talking.
Yeah,
all film. Of course, they took the film, passed it along through channels. Never heard about it again, of course. But there are people, Gordon Cooper would be one, but Fife Symington from the governor of Arizona, former governor of Arizona, mm-hmm. with the Phoenix Lights, talks about, and this is again what I find intriguing. He talks about a UFO the size of an aircraft carrier passing overhead, where he and 1,000 other people literally watched it pass overhead. I don't know, less than 1,000 feet over their head, silently, huge. And he said it was unearthly. It's like nothing he's ever seen. When they said, well, maybe it's an experimental craft, he goes, do you think there'll be an experimental craft the size of a football field that could fly? He goes, because I don't.
Yeah.
It was unearthly. But I mean, from Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, there's a whole host of very, very credible people that have had these experiences. Yes. And again, these Navy pilots, I mean, you're talking about Top Gun pilots.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, if they're not credible, who is?
Well, these are got to be the coolest people under fire or under emergencies on Earth.
You would think so. I mean, and if they're not, we're all in big trouble, right?
And they're getting nervous. They're coming out and saying it. I just heard of a report earlier today, in fact. I think I first got it yesterday, that certain members of Congress are trying to stop the disclosure project that I think it was Steve Schiff was starting. Have you heard anything about that, and what's your opinion on it?
Well, I don't know about stopping it. I just know that Marco Rubio from Florida, senator from Florida, has a great interest in it.
Yes.
And along with others. And if, again, you can just go on the internet and see these congressional hearings. They have Senate hearings. And I mean, they're taking this very serious as a national security issue.
And it should be, of course.
And of course, you know the story. I can't recall the fellow's name, but there was a military installation deep in the Midwest, maybe the Dakotas, but where they had missile sites. I think they had 9 nuclear missile sites there, and a UFO showed up, reported, documented, and every one of them, which had to turn off individually. It couldn't all be turned off. They were discrete, so that couldn't happen.
Right.
1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 9, completely shut down. They had no capability of launching missiles for that period of time. Now, if that's not a national security issue, I don't know what is.
It is. Absolutely. Yeah. Tell me about these folks who went through this thing in the Mojave Desert. How are they doing today?
Well, I don't really like to speak for them, but I'll
course.
tell you my impression. Okay, my impression is that this really altered their lives. I mean, this is something that again, it's think about it. It's like if you went to the moon, everything would dwarf after that. Everything would seem small. Everything would seem probably unimportant because they know something that most people don't, which is there's a whole other dimension, a whole other world that's much bigger and much more in control than anything we're even aware of. And if that's something you firmly believe, it changes your view on life. So they became religious, and I think sometimes when people go through very traumatic circumstances, they find succor, they find solace, comfort in religion, and so they moved to Utah, and they're Mormons, and just again, without getting into too much detail, I'll tell you this: the bishop said that they had a demonic experience. This wasn't about UFOs. This was about a demonic experience. And certainly that's the theological perspective on this. There's a scientific perspective. There's a sociological and psychological perspective. And certainly there's a theological one. I couldn't tell you which one is correct, except that something very extraordinary happened that is unlike anything I know of or I've read. And I follow these things like you do. I mean,
yeah, I'll bet. Hey, the last couple of minutes, and we got to talk more about this sometime, but
my pleasure.
I want to ask you about your next book, which is called The Unwelcomed, The Curious Case of Clara Fowler.
Yeah.
When is that coming out? And can you give us a brief idea of what that is?
Yeah, it'll be available for pre-sale in March, so it's a little ways off, and it'll be available in bookstores in early May. But the story behind this is I was a student at Georgetown University when The Exorcist was being filmed. So I had my manuscript, the young writer, desperate for a publisher. So I chased Bill Blatty, the author of The Exorcist, around quite a bit. And finally, I got him to read it, and he liked it. And we became very good friends. So he helped me get my next book published, which I appreciate no end. And, will be forever thankful. But he also gave me a story. He said, in researching The Exorcist, I came across a case history that is totally documented of demonic possession that happened at the turn of the century. So 1898 to 1904.
Okay.
Studied by William James, Professor William James at Harvard Medical School, lecturer and the founder of American Psychiatry. Dr. Morton Prince, who was a colleague of Sigmund Freud, a clairvoyant, Leonora Piper, and Dr. Richard Hodgson, who was the head of the Psychical Research Institute. Okay. And they all studied this from a paranormal and from a scientific standpoint. And so Blatty was kind enough to make a phone call. I got into the library and had access to the letters, the transcripts of discussions, and it's the most incredible story you could imagine, and I'm really delighted about it.
And briefly, it is a demonic possession case.
Correct.
From the turn of into the 20th century.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow. Was the woman ever given an exorcism, or is this okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get too deep into this because we're going to bring you back when the book comes out.
That'll be my pleasure.
That. The Mojave Incident is available where?
Everywhere. I mean, online in bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Sure.
Okay. Is there an ebook version?
Yeah, there is.
Okay. And have you managed to speak to these folks since the book came out?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I have. But again, it isn't a topic they really want to put this behind them. It isn't like some of the others where there's a lecture circuit and whatnot. This just isn't the way they see it. And again, their religious advisor said, "Look, this is not something you want to dwell on. It happened. It's over. It impacted your life and changed you in ways that were probably incomprehensible. But it's not something you want to talk about and make money on or that kind of thing."
Well, and they're following that, which I have to respect them for that.
Sure,
they're not trying to cash in on it.
Nope.
Which would make you think immediately there's something iffy about it.
Not at all. Yeah.
So I'll give them respect for that, but I'd sure like to hear them out telling their story.
Yeah.
There may be more people who saw something similar that ain't talking about it yet.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that there's still a stigma. As you know, we just talked about the Senate hearings and this and that. There's still a stigma. I mean, there's probably hundreds, if not more, thousands maybe, of pilots, Air Force, Navy, commercial, who don't want to get involved in reporting things about UFOs or things about demonic possession. There's a stigma attached, which can be career-ending in the military, for example.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. When I was in the service, I gave up ghost hunting because of that very reason.
Sure.
You don't get promoted when you talk to the dead.
Yes.
At least you didn't back in the 80s. So, all right. Well, Ron, thanks for coming on, man. You've been an awesome guest, and you've really given us a whole new avenue to consider on this.
My pleasure. And it's a story it never gets old for me because I think it's an important story.
And it is, and it's incredibly interesting. Ron Felber, author of the Mojave Incident and the upcoming The Unwelcomed, and we got to get you back to talk about that book, okay?
My pleasure, Dan.
All right, we'll talk to you here in a few minutes. Just hold on.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Okay, friends, I don't know what to say about this one. We hear about the folks like, let's take Kurt Russell, who flew under the Phoenix Lights and reported it. We've got, as he said, Reagan, Carter, some really important people have went through all of this and talked about it. And yet I've never heard this kind of a story. In a way, it reminds me of the Hopkinsville case. And if you know the Hopkinsville case, of course, it had the little creatures climbing on the house. The people allegedly ended up shooting at them and making a break for the town. A lot of these cases end a lot differently, or at least happen differently. The Walton case, he was unconscious and then he was awake in the ship. So much going on in this case that really we're going to have to make our own decision. So I would consider picking up this book, The Mojave Incident, so you can make up your own mind of what happened. As you all know, I talked about a little bit ago, we had the XCon on X Networks conference a 3 weeks ago in Springfield. We're going to have another one next year. We're already planning it, and you need to be there. You can become a member of the UNX Network, and it is so incredibly easy to do so. My friends, you just have to get onto the website, which is at unxnetwork.com. Get onto it, fill in a few blanks with your email address. That's all it takes. And what do you get out of that? Well, you first get on the blog, the UNX Network blog, and it has been burning up lately with UFO flaps. Turns out that the hotel we had the XCon in Springfield, Missouri, incredibly haunted. I saw shadow people. Other people reported it, and the owners of the employees of the hotel suddenly start saying, "Oh yeah, it's crazy haunted in here." So the blog's been burning up with this kind of thing. Aside from that, you also get into the newsletter, and you get a copy each month mailed to you digitally on the computer for free, the UNX magazine. This is just 2 of them. I had 2 articles in the darker one there from October, That one has a long article I wrote on the battleship North Carolina and the ghosts there. And also, I had researched the old legends of Halloween. If you guys remember it, they used to tell us every Halloween there was satanic groups looking to kidnap virgins and sacrifice them, and putting poison in the food, in the candy, and putting razor blades in the apples. Well, I found the basis of most of those legends, and it was never what they said it was. But again, that was just one issue. We got this issue next to it, which was all time travel. A lot of it was time travel. But again, this comes to you free in an email. You can open it up, read it at your leisure, and it's all for free, just putting your name on the list. Why aren't you a member of the UNX Network? Well, you consider that, because you also get some additional discounts and such on things like the XCon, which will be in Springfield next October. And other than that, I think I'm going to back on out of here. So you guys take care. Keep watching the skies, and for God's sake, get out of the desert if you see something like that. The best way to avoid this kind of thing, stay spooked. Good night.